Don't you dare sit down when my mother is standing. Those were the last words I heard before the world tilted sideways. I was 38 weeks pregnant. My ankles were swollen to the size of grapefruits, and my back felt like it was being sawed in half. But none of that mattered to my husband Marcus. In front of a train full of strangers, he did not just ask me to stand. He grabbed my arm and yanked me out of my seat with such force that I stumbled and almost hit my stomach against the metal pole. The entire subway car went silent. I looked up trying to find balance and saw my mother-in-law Loretta smoothing down her Sunday dress. She did not look concerned. She did not ask if I was okay. She simply smiled that tight little smile she saves for church service and sat down in the warm spot I had just vacated. She looked up at her son and said, "Thank you, baby, for knowing how to treat a lady." I stood there holding the railing, my knuckles turning white while my husband glared at me as if I were the villain. That was the moment I realized I wasn't married to a man. I was married to a dangerous child. Before I tell you how I made them regret every single second of that day, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for your place in your own family. My name is Nia, and I am a 32-year-old chief financial officer for a major supply chain firm in Atlanta. I make 3 times what my husband makes, but you would never know it by looking at our life. I drive a 10-year-old sedan because Marcus insists we need to save money while he drives the brand new truck I paid for. On that Tuesday morning, Marcus had taken my car to drive his mother to her Bible study group because he claimed her car was making a funny noise. That meant I had to take the train to my final prenatal checkup. I did not mind public transit usually, but at 9 months pregnant in the Georgia heat, it was torture. When Marcus called and said he and his mother would meet me on the train to go to the doctor together, I thought it was a sweet gesture. I was wrong. It was an ambush. The train was packed with the morning rush hour crowd. The air conditioning was broken and the smell of sweat and metal was making me nauseous. I had been standing for 10 minutes when a young college student saw my belly and immediately jumped up. He insisted I take his seat. I sank into that plastic orange chair with a sigh of relief that rattled my ribs. I closed my eyes for just a second, trying to breathe through a Braxton Hicks contraction. That was when they got on. I heard Loretta's voice before I saw her. She was complaining loudly about the heat and how the walk down the stairs had aggravated her sciatica. Marcus was right behind her, wiping sweat from his forehead. They spotted me immediately. I lifted my hand to wave, but Marcus did not wave back. His face twisted into a scowl. He marched over to me through the crowd, pushing past people. "Get up, Nia," he said. His voice wasn't a whisper. It was a command. I blinked, thinking I had misheard him. What I asked. "Get up," he repeated louder this time. "Mom's legs are hurting. She needs to sit." I looked at Loretta. She was standing there, clutching her purse, looking at me with an expectant expression. She wasn't frail. She was a sturdy, healthy 60-year-old woman who went to Zumba classes 3 times a week. I, on the other hand, could barely feel my toes. "Marcus," I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm so we wouldn't cause a scene. "I am having contractions. My feet are killing me. Can she just lean against the pole for a few stops?" That was the wrong thing to say. The look in Marcus's eyes shifted from annoyance to pure rage. "You are so selfish," he spat out. "After everything she has done for us, you can't stand for 10 minutes. And then he did it. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm. His fingers dug into my flesh hard enough to bruise. He didn't help me up. He jerked me up. My center of gravity was off because of the baby, and I stumbled forward. If I hadn't grabbed the overhead strap, I would have fallen face first onto the dirty floor. A collective gasp rippled through the train car. A man in a construction uniform started to stand up to intervene, but Marcus shot him a look that dared him to move. "This is family business," Marcus growled. I stood there trembling, not from fear, but from a sudden, icy shock. My husband had just physically assaulted me to please his mother. Loretta settled into the seat with a sigh of content. She opened her fan and started waving it in front of her face. You raised a good man, Loretta, she said to herself loud enough for me to hear. He knows respect. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I froze. The shame was burning my face hotter than the humid air. I turned my head away to hide the tears welling in my eyes, and that is when I saw her. Sitting directly across from us was an older black woman. She was dressed in an impeccable cream-colored suit with a silk scarf around her neck. Her hair was silver and styled in a perfect bob. She wasn't looking at Marcus. She wasn't looking at Loretta. She was looking directly at me. Her eyes were dark and intense, filled with a mixture of sorrow and steel. She held my gaze for a long moment amidst the rattling noise of the train. She didn't speak out loud, but I saw her lips move clearly. She mouthed just one word: run. It hit me harder than the physical yank. This stranger saw what I had been refusing to see for years. She saw the danger. She didn't see a bad husband. She saw a predator. I looked down at my stomach at the life I was about to bring into this world, and I realized she was right. But I couldn't run. Not yet. The ride to the hospital was silent, but the ride home was a war zone. We took a taxi back because I refused to get on the train again. When we walked into our apartment, the tension was thick enough to choke on. I dropped my keys on the counter and turned to face them. I expected an apology. I foolishly thought that maybe now in the privacy of our home, Marcus would realize he had crossed a line. Instead, he went on the attack. "Why do you always have to be so dramatic, Naya?" he asked, throwing his jacket on the sofa. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You made me look like a bad guy just because you didn't want to show a little respect to your elder." I stared at him in disbelief. "I embarrassed you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You almost threw your pregnant wife on the floor, Marcus. You hurt me." I pulled up my sleeve to show him the red finger marks already forming on my bicep. "Look at this." Loretta clicked her tongue from the kitchen where she was already helping herself to my juice. "Oh, stop it, girl," she called out. "You bruise like a peach. He barely touched you." Back in my day, we didn't complain about every little thing. We supported our men. We didn't try to make them feel small. "You have been giving him attitude all week. I think you are just using this pregnancy to be lazy." Lazy. I worked 60 hours a week. I paid the mortgage. I paid for the groceries in her hand. I paid for the very roof over her head. I felt a scream building in my throat, but Marcus cut me off. He walked over to where my hospital bag was sitting by the door, packed and ready for the delivery. He looked at it with disdain. "You care more about this bag and this baby than you do about the people who are actually here," he said. And then he kicked it. He pulled his leg back and kicked my hospital bag across the room. It slammed into the wall and tipped over, spilling baby clothes and diapers onto the hardwood floor. A little pair of blue socks that I had bought just yesterday slid across the floor and stopped at his feet. The violence of the action was so casual, so unnecessary. He didn't even look down. He just walked past me into the living room and turned on the TV. Loretta walked past me too, patting my shoulder patronizingly as she went. "Go clean that up, Nia," she said. "You don't want to trip over it later." I stood there for a long time staring at the tiny blue socks. I didn't yell. I didn't fight back. I calmly walked over, picked up the socks, and put them back in the bag. Then I walked into the guest bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower so they wouldn't hear me. And then I slid down to the cold tile floor and covered my mouth to scream. The stranger on the train was right. I had to run. But I couldn't just leave. Not with my assets tangled with his. Not with my name on the deed that he thought was his. I wiped my face and looked at myself in the mirror. The crying stopped. The planning began. They wanted a submissive wife and a dutiful daughter-in-law. I would give them exactly that until I was ready to take everything back. The hospital room was freezing. It was the kind of sterile artificial cold that settles deep into your bones and refuses to leave. But the shivering wasn't just from the temperature. It was from the terrifying isolation of bringing a human being into the world while the chair next to my bed sat empty. I had been in active labor for 14 hours. 14 hours of breathing through fire. 14 hours of nurses asking me with pity in their eyes if my husband was on his way. I kept making excuses for him. I told them traffic was bad. I told them he was coming from a big meeting. I lied to protect a man who wasn't even there to hold my hand. When the door finally swung open, I was exhausted, my hair plastered to my forehead with sweat and my throat raw from screaming. But it wasn't relief I felt when Marcus and Loretta walked in. It was nausea. The smell hit me first. The thick, greasy scent of fried chicken and spicy hot sauce mixed with Loretta's overwhelming floral perfume. They didn't look worried. They didn't look like they had rushed. Marcus had a grease stain on his chin. "Where have you been?" I rasped out, my voice barely a whisper. "I called you 3 hours ago when the water broke." Marcus didn't even come to the bedside. He sat down in the recliner and stretched his legs out. "Mom was feeling faint, Nia," he said, as if that explained everything. Her blood sugar dropped. "We had to stop and get her some food. You know she can't go long without eating." I looked at Loretta. She was currently sucking the grease off her fingers, looking revitalized and energetic. She hadn't been faint. She just hadn't wanted to wait in a hospital waiting room on an empty stomach. So my husband left his wife in labor to take his mother to a buffet. I didn't have the energy to fight. The contractions were coming back harder and faster now, ripping through my midsection like a tidal wave. The next 2 hours were a blur of pain and pressure. When our son finally arrived, crying and red-faced, I felt a surge of love so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. The nurse cleaned him up and placed him on my chest. He was perfect. He had my nose and his father's chin. For a split second, I forgot about the chicken. I forgot about the subway incident. I just saw my baby. The nurse smiled, pulling out the birth certificate paperwork on a clipboard. She clicked her pen, ready to write. "He is beautiful," she said softly. "Have you picked a name for him, Mom?" I smiled down at the tiny bundle in my arms. I had picked a name months ago, a name that meant flowing down like a river, strong and enduring. "Jordan," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "His name is Jordan." Before the nurse could touch the pen to the paper, a hand shot out and covered the clipboard. It was Loretta's. "No," she said sharply. "That is not his name." I looked up confused. "Excuse me," I asked. Loretta didn't even look at me. She looked at the nurse with an air of authority that made my skin crawl. "We are not naming a boy of this bloodline Jordan. That sounds like a basketball player. His name is Marcus Jr. the second. It is a family tradition. My father was Marcus. My son is Marcus. And this baby will be Marcus." I tightened my hold on my son. "No," I said firmly. "We discussed this. I told Marcus months ago I didn't want a junior. I want him to have his own identity. His name is Jordan." I looked at my husband, expecting him to back me up. We had talked about this. He had agreed late one night that Jordan was a good name. But that was when his mother wasn't in the room. Now, with Loretta staring at him with her eyebrows raised, Marcus crumbled like wet paper. "Come on," Nia, Marcus said, avoiding my eyes. "It means a lot to Mom. It's just a name." "Why are you being so difficult?" Difficult. I had just pushed a human out of my body, and he was calling me difficult for wanting to name him. The nurse looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and the two people looming over my bed. "Mom has to sign the certificate," she said gently, trying to give me an out. But before I could speak, the door clicked open again. It was Tiffany. My sister-in-law walked in carrying a massive bouquet of lilies, which I was allergic to. She looked perfect as always, her blonde hair blown out, her makeup flawless. She spotted the tension immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, putting the flowers down on the tray table right next to my water. "Is everything okay?" Loretta huffed, crossing her arms. "Nia is refusing to honor the family. She wants to name the baby Jordan instead of Marcus Jr." Tiffany gasped theatrically, pressing a hand to her chest. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes, the kind she used whenever she wanted to make me feel small. Oh, Nia, surely you aren't serious. She laughed, a tinkering sound that grated on my nerves. Marcus Jr. is such a powerful name. It sounds like a CEO. It sounds like a legacy. You should be grateful that the family wants him to carry the torch. Most women would be honored to have their son named after such a strong line of men. Jordan is cute, I guess, but it is a little common, isn't it? The room felt like it was shrinking. The three of them stood there united. Marcus, the weak man-child, Loretta, the matriarch who pulled his strings, and Tiffany, the outsider who had somehow become the judge of my life. They were a wall of pressure. I looked at the nurse. She was waiting. I looked at my son. He was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his identity was being stolen before he was even an hour old. I was so tired. My body felt like it had been run over by a truck. The fight drained out of me, not because I agreed, but because I physically could not argue anymore. Fine, I whispered, closing my eyes. Write it down. Marcus Jr. Loretta clapped her hands together, delighted. See, was that so hard, she chirped. She reached over and patted the baby's head possessively. Welcome to the world, little Marcus. You are one of us now. Tiffany smiled, beaming at my husband. Good job, Marcus. You really put your foot down. It is important to establish leadership early. Marcus puffed up his chest, proud of himself for bullying his exhausted wife. I lay back against the pillows, listening to them celebrate. They passed my son around like a trophy, taking selfies and talking about who he looked like. They didn't ask if I needed water. They didn't ask if I was in pain. I watched them, and something inside me shifted. The sadness that had been weighing me down since the subway evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard knot of hatred began to form. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. They had just named my son after his father, but they didn't realize one thing. Names can be changed, deeds can be rewritten, and legacies can be destroyed. I looked at the three of them laughing under the harsh hospital lights, and I made a silent vow to my son. You might have his name today, baby boy, but you will have my future. And they will have nothing. The nurse caught my eye again as she was leaving. She saw the look on my face. It wasn't the look of a defeated mother. It was the look of a general planning a war. Coming home from the hospital is supposed to be a moment of relief. It is supposed to be the time when you finally close your front door against the world and cocoon yourself with your new family. I had fantasized about this moment for 9 months. I had imagined walking into my clean, quiet sanctuary, laying my son in his bassinet, and finally sleeping in my own bed. But as soon as Marcus unlocked the door, I knew that the sanctuary I had built was gone. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It did not smell like my lavender diffuser or the fresh linen candles I loved. It smelled like bleach, bacon grease, and old perfume. It smelled like Loretta. I stepped into the foyer holding the car seat, and my jaw dropped. My hallway was different. The walls, which used to display a curated collection of African art that I had spent years collecting, were bare. My grandmother's hand-carved mask from Nigeria was gone. The woven tapestry from Ghana that hung over the console table was missing. In their place hung a massive velvet painting of a weeping Jesus and a framed football jersey that Marcus had worn in high school. I stood there frozen, blinking in disbelief. I turned to Marcus, my voice rising in panic. Where is my art? Where are my things? Marcus didn't even look up from bringing the bags in. He just shrugged. Mom did some redecorating while we were in the hospital. She wanted to make the place feel more welcoming for the baby. Welcoming. My house now looked like the lobby of a budget funeral home. I walked into the living room and the violation got worse. My beige cashmere throw blankets were gone, replaced by scratchy crocheted afghans in neon orange and brown. My minimalist coffee table was covered in ceramic figurines of ducks and angels. And there, sitting in my favorite armchair, was Loretta. She was wearing my silk robe, the one I had bought for myself as a treat before the wedding. She had her feet propped up on the ottoman, watching a soap opera at full volume. She looked over at us and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome home," she boomed, not getting up to help. "I see you finally brought the air home." I ignored her comment. I walked right up to the TV and turned it off. The silence that followed was heavy. "Where is my art, Loretta?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and rage. "Those pieces are worth thousands of dollars." "Where are they?" She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, that jungle junk. I put it in the garage. You can't have those scary masks staring at a baby Nia. It invites evil spirits. I cleanse the house with holy oil and prayer. You should be thanking me." I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to defend our home, waiting for him to tell his mother that she had no right to touch our property. But Marcus just dropped the bags and sat down on the sofa next to her. "Mom is right, babe," he said. "That mask was kind of creepy. This feels more like a family home now." I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I angrily wiped it away. I was not going to cry in front of them. I grabbed the car seat and marched toward the guest room, intending to set up a temporary station for the baby since the nursery was upstairs. But when I opened the door to the guest suite, I stopped dead. The room was unrecognizable. My guest's bed was covered in Loretta's clothes. Her suitcases were exploded all over the floor. On the nightstand were her dentures and a glass of water and a stack of Bible study pamphlets. She hadn't just come to help. She had moved in. I turned around to see her standing in the doorway smirking. "I am going to stay for a few months," she announced. "You clearly don't know what you are doing with a baby. You need guidance. And since Marcus is working so hard, I need to be here to make sure his dinner is on the table." I wanted to kick her out right then and there. I wanted to scream that her name was not on the deed and that she was trespassing. But I was 3 days postpartum. My stitches were throbbing, my breasts were leaking, and I could barely stand upright. I retreated. I took my son upstairs to our bedroom and locked the door. For the next 3 hours, I stayed there listening to them laugh and talk downstairs. It sounded like a party that I wasn't invited to in my own house. But hunger eventually forced me out. My body needed fuel to produce milk, and I hadn't eaten since the hospital toast that morning. I walked down to the kitchen, hoping to make a simple salad or a smoothie. But the kitchen was a war zone. Every pot and pan I owned was dirty and piled in the sink. The counters were covered in flour and grease, and the smell was overpowering. Loretta was standing at the stove frying pork chops. A pot of collard greens was boiling with ham hocks, and there was a tray of cornbread dripping with butter. It was a heart attack on a plate. She saw me and shoveled a massive pile of food onto a plate. "Sit down and eat," she commanded, shoving the plate into my hands. "You need meat on your bones if you are going to feed my grandson." I looked at the food. It was swimming in oil. The pork chop was burnt on the edges but looked raw in the middle. My stomach turned. "Loretta." "I can't eat this," I said, trying to be polite. "My doctor told me to stick to lean proteins and vegetables while I am recovering. This is too heavy for me." And frankly, looking at the grease pooling on the plate made me want to vomit. Loretta's face turned thunderous. She slammed her spatula down on the counter. "Oh, so now you are too good for soul food," she yelled. "This is how I raised Marcus, and look at him. He is a strong man. You and your doctor don't know anything. You are trying to starve that baby with your rabbit food. Eat it." I set the plate down on the table. "No," I said firmly. "I will make myself some oatmeal." I turned my back to her to open the pantry. That was when I heard the footsteps, heavy and fast. Before I could react, Loretta grabbed the plate of food. She didn't put it in the trash. She didn't put it in the fridge. She marched past me into the powder room, the small bathroom off the kitchen that I kept pristine for guests. I followed her, confused. "What are you doing?" I asked. She stood over my imported porcelain sink, the one with the hand-painted details that cost more than her car. She looked me dead in the eye and tilted the plate. The pork chops, the greens, the cornbread, and the cup of hot grease slid off the plate and plopped into the sink. It was a disgusting wet sound. The grease immediately began to congeal on the cold porcelain, clogging the drain instantly. The food sat there like a heap of garbage in my beautiful basin. "If you don't want it, then the pipes can have it," she spat out. "Ungrateful heifer! You think you are better than us because you have a degree and a fancy job. But you are just a disrespectful girl who doesn't know her place. Cleaning this up will teach you some humility." She dropped the dirty plate on the floor, shattering it into 3 pieces, and walked out of the bathroom. I stood there staring at the mess. The brown pot liquor from the greens was staining the white ceramic. The smell of the food in the small space was suffocating. I heard Marcus in the living room laughing at something on the TV. He hadn't even come to check on the noise. He didn't care. Neither of them did. They weren't here to help me. They were here to break me. They were here to mark their territory like stray dogs pissing on a fence. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were dark with fatigue, but there was something else there too. A spark. A cold, dangerous spark. Loretta thought she was teaching me humility. But as I looked at that clogged sink, I realized she was teaching me something else entirely. She was teaching me that mercy was a weakness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call a plumber. I opened the app for the hidden cameras I had ordered from the hospital bed. I checked the angles. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, and I made a mental note to install one right here pointing at this sink. If they wanted a show, I would give them a blockbuster. I stepped over the broken plate and walked out. I didn't clean the sink. I left it there as a monument to their filth, and I went upstairs to plot my next move. The invasion of my home did not stop with Loretta moving in. It escalated with the daily arrival of Tiffany. If Loretta was the tank crushing everything in her path, then Tiffany was the sniper picking off whatever dignity I had left. She arrived every morning at 10 o'clock sharp, just as I was trying to get the baby down for a nap. She didn't bring food. She didn't offer to hold the baby so I could shower. She brought nothing but judgment wrapped in a cloud of cloying vanilla perfume. She treated my home like her personal clubhouse, and my son like a doll she could play with until he started crying, at which point she would hand him back to me with a look of distaste. On Tuesday morning, I was changing Marcus Jr. on the changing table in the living room because Loretta had piled her laundry on the one in the nursery. I was exhausted. My eyes felt like they had sand in them, and my body was still aching from the birth. I was moving slowly, carefully wiping my son's sensitive skin. Tiffany stood right behind me, hovering like a health inspector. She sipped her iced coffee, the condensation dripping onto my hardwood floors. "Is that how you are doing it?" she asked, her voice pitched high with fake curiosity. I didn't look up. "Is that how I am doing what, Tiffany?" She gestured vaguely at the diaper. "The folding. It looks a little loose, doesn't it? My sister-in-law in Buckhead uses a specific swaddling technique with organic cloth diapers. It is much more civilized than these disposable things. You know, chemicals can seep into the brain. We just want him to be smart, right?" I paused, my hand hovering over the adhesive tab. Civilized. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. She was a white woman standing in a black woman's house, calling her care for her own child uncivilized. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of baby powder to center myself. "Tiffany," I said, keeping my voice even. "Pampers are fine. He is clean. He is dry. And unless you are volunteering to wash dirty cloth diapers by hand, I suggest you let me handle this." Tiffany laughed that tinkling glass laugh again. "Oh, Nia, you are so defensive. I'm just trying to help. You seem so overwhelmed. It is understandable. Not everyone is cut out for motherhood naturally. Some people have to work harder at it." She took a sip of her coffee, leaving a wet ring on my antique side table. "I just want to make sure little Marcus has the best start. We all do." She walked away, leaving me shaking with suppressed rage. She didn't care about the baby. She cared about asserting dominance. But her attacks weren't just verbal. Later that afternoon, I finally got the baby to sleep and stole away to the master bathroom for 5 minutes of peace. I wanted to wash my face. I wanted to feel human again. I reached for my favorite serum, a $300 bottle of liquid gold that made my skin glow. I picked it up and it felt light. Too light. I frowned and looked at the counter. The cap was sitting next to the bottle. It had been left off. I looked at my moisturizer, my expensive imported face cream. The lid was unscrewed and sitting on the marble. The product inside had turned yellow and hard, forming a crust on top. It was ruined. I looked at my makeup bag. It was unzipped. My favorite lipstick, a limited edition red, was smashed, as if someone had twisted it all the way up and then jammed the cap back on. This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. Tiffany had used the restroom earlier. She had come in here, gone through my things, and deliberately destroyed the few items that made me feel beautiful. She was jealous. She was jealous of my career, jealous of my house, and jealous that I could afford things she had to beg her parents for. I stared at the ruined cosmetics and realized she was trying to strip away my armor. She wanted me to look tired. She wanted me to look haggard. Because if I looked like a mess, it would match the narrative she was building. I left the bathroom without washing my face. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I walked out to the landing at the top of the stairs, intending to go down and confront her. But I stopped when I heard voices drifting up from the kitchen. The acoustics in the house were perfect, carrying sound straight up the stairwell. Loretta and Tiffany were sitting at the island drinking my wine. "She looks terrible, doesn't she?" Tiffany said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I mean really terrible. Have you seen the bags under her eyes? She is snapping at everyone. I tried to give her a little advice about the baby today and she practically bit my head off." Loretta sighed, the sound of a martyr. "I know, honey. It is hard to watch. I think she is unstable. You know mental illness runs in some families. I am worried about Marcus Jr. Do you think she is safe to be around him alone?" My blood ran cold. I gripped the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. They weren't just gossiping, they were planting seeds. Unstable. Unsafe. These were legal terms. These were words used in custody battles. Tiffany's voice dropped even lower, dripping with fake concern. "I read about this. Postpartum psychosis. It starts with aggression and neglect. Marcus told me she hasn't been cooking or cleaning. She just locks herself in the room with the baby. That is isolation, Loretta. That is a red flag. Honestly, if she can't handle it, maybe Marcus should step in. For the baby's safety, of course. You are already here doing all the work. If Nia needs to go away for treatment, well, the baby would be better off with his father and his grandmother, right?" I stood there frozen on the stairs. The cruelty was breathtaking. I wasn't cooking because Loretta threw my food in the sink. I was locking my door because they had invaded every other inch of my house. And now they were twisting my survival tactics into evidence of insanity. They were plotting to take my son. They wanted to paint me as the crazy, angry black woman so they could swoop in and play saviors. Loretta hummed in agreement. "You are right, Tiffany. You are so smart. We have to protect the legacy. If she snaps, we need to be ready to call the authorities. Marcus needs a strong woman by his side, not a charity case." I backed away from the stairs, slowly making sure the floorboards didn't creak. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I went back into my bedroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking as I reached for my laptop. I didn't cry. I was done crying. Crying was what they wanted. Crying was evidence of instability. I opened the security camera app. The camera I had installed in the kitchen vent had a microphone. I rewound the footage. There it was, crystal clear audio. "If she snaps, we need to call the authorities." I hit the save button. Then I backed it up to the cloud. Then I emailed a copy to a secret server. They wanted to build a case against me. They wanted to prove I was unfit. But they had just handed me the smoking gun. I looked at my sleeping son. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a victim. They didn't know that I was a CFO. I managed risk for a living, and I knew exactly how to liquidate a bad investment. Tiffany wanted to play doctor and diagnose me. Fine, I would give her a diagnosis. Terminal stupidity. I closed my laptop and walked into the bathroom. I picked up the ruined lipstick and threw it in the trash. I didn't need paint to go to war. I had the truth. And I was going to let them dig their grave a little deeper before I pushed them in. The vibration of my phone on the granite countertop sounded like a warning shot. I was in the kitchen trying to pump breast milk while answering emails for a merger that was worth $20 million. My life was a juggling act of high-stakes finance and bodily fluids. I glanced at the screen, expecting a message from my assistant about the quarterly projections. Instead, I saw a notification from American Express. Transaction alert. $5,200. The merchant name was not Target. It was not Whole Foods. It was Luxe Boutique, a high-end designer reseller in Buckhead. My heart stopped beating for a second. I stared at the numbers. $5,000. I had given Marcus a supplementary card on my account 2 weeks ago. He had given me a sob story about needing to pick up emergency supplies for the baby and not having liquidity because his funds were tied up in investments. I knew his investments were non-existent, but I was tired and I wanted to trust him. I explicitly told him that the card was for diapers formula and medical emergencies only. Unless the baby needed a gold-plated pacifier, there was no reason for a $5,000 charge. My hands were shaking as I wiped them and picked up the phone. I called the bank immediately. The customer service representative confirmed the purchase. One vintage quilted lambskin handbag, black with gold hardware. A handbag. My husband had used my credit line, the money I earned working 80-hour weeks, to buy a luxury handbag while I was wearing nursing tanks with spit up on them. The audacity was so staggering I almost laughed. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and I felt the last thread of my marriage snap. It wasn't just theft. It was a declaration of war. When Marcus walked through the door an hour later, he was whistling. He had a bounce in his step that I hadn't seen in months. He didn't have diapers. He didn't have groceries. He had empty hands and a guilty smile. I was sitting at the kitchen island, the bank statement pulled up on my iPad. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I learned in the boardroom that the quietest person in the room is usually the most dangerous. Marcus. I said, my voice ice cold. Why did American Express just alert me to a purchase at Luxe Boutique? Marcus froze mid-step. The whistle died on his lips. He looked at the iPad, then at me, and I saw his brain working, trying to come up with a lie. He cleared his throat and adjusted his collar. Oh, that. Yeah, I was going to tell you about that. It is a business expense, Nia. You know I have been trying to court that new client, the one with the real estate firm. Well, I need to look the part. You can't show up to a closing looking cheap. It is an investment in my image. You are a CFO, you should understand that sometimes you have to spend money to make money. I stared at him. He was lying to my face, and he wasn't even good at it. You bought a women's handbag for a business meeting with a male real estate developer, I asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus flinched. He hadn't expected me to know the item details. He scrambled for a pivot. It wasn't for me, obviously. It was a gift. For the client's wife, to seal the deal. It is a strategy, Nia. God, why do you have to micromanage everything? This is why our marriage is suffocating. I am out here trying to build a future for us, and you are tracking me like a parole officer. He was gaslighting me, turning his theft into my failure as a wife. He was trying to make me feel guilty for catching him stealing from me. I looked at him, and I saw a stranger. No, I saw a parasite. A parasite that had attached itself to my bank account and was draining me dry while blaming me for its hunger. I didn't press him further. I didn't demand he return it. I simply nodded slowly. Okay, Marcus. If it is for business, I expect to see a return on this investment. He let out a sigh of relief, clearly thinking he had outsmarted me. He walked over and kissed me on the forehead, a gesture that made my skin crawl. Thanks for understanding, babe. You will see. Big things are coming. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and went to join his mother in the living room, leaving me alone with the truth. I knew he was lying, but I needed to know who the bag was really for. I had a suspicion, and it made my stomach turn. The confirmation arrived the next morning in the form of Tiffany. She breezed through my front door at her usual time of 10 o'clock, but today she looked different. She was wearing a simple white dress, but draped over her shoulder like a shield of armor was the bag. The black quilted leather shone under my foyer lights. The gold interlocked C logo seemed to wink at me, mocking my stupidity. It was the exact bag from the transaction. Loretta looked up from her spot on the couch and gasped. "Oh my goodness, Tiffany," she squealed, clapping her hands. "Is that the new Chanel? It is gorgeous. You look like a movie star." Tiffany preened, posing with the bag. She stroked the leather with a reverence she never showed to my son. "I know, right?" she said, her voice dripping with syrup. "It was the sweetest surprise. Marcus gave it to me this morning. He said it was a thank you gift for welcoming the baby into the family and for being such a support system for him during this stressful time." I stood in the doorway holding a basket of dirty laundry, and I felt the air leave my lungs. He hadn't bought it for a client. He hadn't bought it for his mother. He had used my money to buy a $5,000 bag for his sister-in-law, the woman who was plotting to take my child. He was sleeping with her. Maybe not physically yet, but financially and emotionally. He was in bed with her. They were a team, and I was the bank. Tiffany turned to me, her eyes wide and challenging. "Isn't your husband the most generous man, Nia?" she asked. "You are so lucky to have a provider like him. Most men wouldn't be this thoughtful. He really appreciates family. I hope you thanked him for being such a good brother to me." The rage that surged through me was so hot, I thought I might spontaneously combust. I looked at the bag. My bag. Paid for with the hours I spent away from my newborn. Paid for with the stress that was making my hair shed. They were parading my stolen labor in front of my face and daring me to speak. If I called them out now, they would call me crazy. They would say I was jealous of his generosity. They would use it as proof that I was unstable and aggressive. I forced a smile onto my face. It felt like stretching plastic. "It is beautiful, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady. "Marcus is certainly generous with his resources. You should enjoy it. It is a very expensive piece." Tiffany smirked, thinking she had won. She didn't know that I was already calculating the interest on this loan. I walked into the laundry room and set the basket down. Then I pulled out my phone. I didn't call Marcus. I called my forensic accountant. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. If he was bold enough to charge $5,000 to a card, I saw he was definitely moving money in ways I hadn't noticed yet. I wasn't just going to divorce him. I was going to audit him. As I listened to Tiffany and Loretta cackling in the other room, admiring the bag, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of a sniper waiting for the wind to settle. They were celebrating their victory. They were drinking my wine and wearing my money. But they had made a fatal error. They had left a paper trail. And in my world, paper trails were more lethal than bullets. "Keep the bag." "Tiffany," I whispered to the empty room, "it is going to cost you everything, because when I am done with you, that bag will be the only asset you have left to sell when you are living in a cardboard box." The time for tears was over. The time for liquidation had begun. Most wives react to infidelity or theft with screaming matches and thrown vases. But I am a chief financial officer. When I find a discrepancy in the books, I do not throw a tantrum. I initiate an audit. And when the discrepancy is in my marriage, I initiate surveillance. I waited until Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday was the day Loretta went to her senior citizens prayer circle and Marcus took the car to get it detailed, which I now knew meant meeting Tiffany for lunch on my dime. The house was empty. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating, as I moved through the rooms with a stepladder and a toolkit. I felt like a burglar in my own home. I replaced the smoke detector in the living room with a unit that housed a high-definition 4K camera with a wide-angle lens. I swapped out the USB wall charger in the kitchen for one that recorded audio. And finally, I went into the guest room where Loretta had set up her command center. I placed a tiny camera inside the hollowed-out spine of an old Bible on her nightstand. It was poetic justice. She used scripture to manipulate me so I would use scripture to expose her. By the time they returned, I was sitting in my home office with the door locked, monitoring the feeds on a secure server. The visuals were stark. The camera in the living room cast everything in a slightly grainy black and white filter that made my house look like the set of a crime documentary, which was fitting, because a crime was in progress. I watched as Loretta waddled in, kicking off her shoes and throwing them onto my pristine rug. Marcus followed her, holding a takeout cup of coffee. They looked comfortable. They looked like they owned the place. And as soon as they started talking, I realized that is exactly what they thought. I adjusted the volume on my headphones, my heart hammering against my ribs. The audio crackled for a second before stabilizing. Loretta sank onto the sofa and let out a long, dramatic sigh. "Lord have mercy, my feet are killing me," she complained. Marcus came into the frame and sat on the coffee table facing her. He looked agitated. He was bouncing his leg, a nervous tic he had since we were dating. "Did you talk to her about the deed?" he asked. His voice was low, but the microphone picked it up clearly. Loretta waved a dismissive hand. "I am working on it, baby. You have to be patient. You can't just demand it." Nia is stubborn. She thinks she is smart because she went to that fancy business school. But she is book smart, not street smart. She is emotionally weak right now. The hormones have her all messed up. Look at how she reacted to the bag. She barely fought back. That tells me she is tired. I stared at the screen. They were analyzing my exhaustion like generals looking for a breach in the enemy walls. Marcus rubbed his face. "I know, Ma, but we need to move faster. Tiffany's parents are asking about my collateral for the investment. If I can show them the title to this penthouse, they will sign the check for the seed money. I need that cash flow. I can't keep living off Nia's allowance. It is humiliating." Loretta leaned forward and placed a hand on his knee. "Listen to me, Marcus. You are the head of this house. God appointed you as the leader. Nia is just the vessel God used to bring you money. It is your right to control it. You just have to play the game a little longer. Be nice to her. Bring her some flowers. Tell her she looks pretty, even if she looks like a wreck. Once she feels secure, she will sign anything you put in front of her. Tell her it is for tax purposes. Tell her it protects the baby. She is so obsessed with that boy, she will do anything to protect him. Just get her signature on that quitclaim deed, and then we can stop pretending. A vessel." I was just a vessel. A bank account with a womb. I felt bile rise in my throat. I had supported this woman. I had paid for her hip surgery. I had flown her to Jamaica for her 60th birthday. And to her I was nothing more than a resource to be mined and discarded. But what Marcus said next shattered whatever fragments of love I still held for him. "I don't know if I can keep pretending, Ma," Marcus said, standing up and pacing the room. "It is getting hard to look at her. Have you seen her since the birth? She is huge. Her stomach is all loose and hanging with those stretch marks. It is disgusting. Every time she tries to touch me, I want to recoil. She walks around in those nursing tanks and she smells like sour milk. I look at her, and I just see a cow." I froze. My hand went instinctively to my stomach. It was soft. It was marked with silver lines, the map of where my son had grown. I had hated my body in the quiet moments of the night, but hearing my husband confirm my worst insecurities out loud was a physical blow. He wasn't just indifferent, he was repulsed. Loretta laughed. A cruel, dry cackle. "Oh, stop whining. She just had a baby. She will bounce back. Or she won't. Who cares? Once you have the house and the money, it doesn't matter what she looks like. You can have your fun elsewhere. Just keep your eyes on the prize. Think about Tiffany. She is polished. She comes from a good family. That is the kind of energy you need around you, not this moody, dark cloud Nia brings into the room." Marcus stopped pacing. A smile crept onto his face. A smile I hadn't seen in years. "Tiffany is different," he said softly. "She gets me. She doesn't make me feel small. She looks at me like I am a king. Nia looks at me like I am an employee she is thinking about firing." I leaned back in my chair, taking off the headphones. My hands were trembling, but my mind was crystal clear. He was right about one thing. I was looking at him like an employee who had been embezzling company funds and disparaging the CEO. And in the corporate world, we had a very specific protocol for that. It was called termination for cause. I looked at the black and white image of them on the screen. They were planning to steal my home. They were planning to use my son as leverage. And they were laughing about it. Marcus sat back down and pulled out his phone, probably to text Tiffany. Loretta turned the TV on and put her feet up on my coffee table again. They looked so comfortable in their conspiracy. They had no idea that the moody dark cloud upstairs was actually a Category 5 hurricane gathering strength. I saved the clip. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers and a physical hard drive. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Operation Eviction. I wasn't just going to divorce Marcus. I was going to destroy him. I was going to make sure that by the time I was done, the only thing he would be the head of was a line at the unemployment office. I stood up and walked to the mirror in my office. I lifted my shirt and looked at my postpartum stomach. I traced the stretch marks with my finger. They weren't ugly. They were battle scars. I had created life. Marcus had created nothing but debt and lies. He called me a cow. Fine, but he forgot that you don't mess with a mother protecting her calf. I pulled my shirt down and smoothed my hair. I checked the time. It was 5 o'clock. Time to go downstairs and cook dinner. Time to play the part of the submissive, clueless wife one last time. I would smile, I would nod, I might even sign their fake papers with invisible ink, because the trap was set, and they had just walked right into the kill zone. I unlocked my office door and headed for the stairs. As I walked down, I heard Loretta yelling from the living room, "Nia, what is for dinner? I hope you aren't making that dry chicken again." I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. "No, Loretta," I whispered to myself. "Tonight we are having something special. Tonight I am serving revenge. And it is going to be cold." The camera in the living room tracked my movement as I entered the frame. On the screen, I saw myself walk in. I saw Marcus look up with a fake smile masking his disgust. I saw Loretta mute the TV. "Hey babe," Marcus said, his voice sickeningly sweet. "You look rested. Did you get some work done?" I walked over and kissed his cheek, fighting the urge to vomit. "I did," I said softly. "I got a lot of work done. You have no idea." He patted my hip, his hand lingering on the curve he had just called disgusting. "Great. Mom and I were just talking about how we can help you with the paperwork for the house. We want to take that stress off your plate." I looked him dead in the eye. "You are so thoughtful, Marcus. We can definitely talk about the house. In fact, I have a big surprise regarding the house coming up very soon." Loretta clapped her hands. "See, I told you she would come around. Praise the Lord." I walked into the kitchen, my back to them. I picked up the knife to start chopping vegetables. The blade glinted under the kitchen lights. The camera above the fridge caught the glint. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't crazy. I was simply a woman who had seen the truth, and the truth had set me free from the burden of loving them. Now all that was left was the execution, and I didn't mean the paperwork. I meant the systematic dismantling of their entire world. The house was quiet at midnight, but my laptop screen was alive with the grainy black and white footage from the kitchen camera. I sat in the darkness of my home office, my headphones pressed tight against my ears, waiting for the next blow. Marcus and Tiffany were sitting at the kitchen island sharing a bottle of my expensive red wine. They were leaning in close, their heads almost touching. It looked intimate. It looked like an affair. But as I turned up the volume, I realized what they were discussing was far worse than sex. It was biology. Tiffany looked around the empty kitchen nervously before reaching across the table to grab Marcus's hand. "Did you think about what we discussed?" she whispered. The microphone picked up the tremor in her voice. "I am running out of time, Marcus. My ovulation window is closing in 3 days. If we are going to do this, we have to do it now." Marcus took a sip of wine and leaned back, looking pleased with himself. "I don't know, Tiff," he said, teasing her. It is a big ask. My DNA is premium stuff. Look at me. I was a linebacker. I am 6'3". My son is going to be a beast. You are asking for top-tier genetics here. Tiffany rolled her eyes, but her desperation was palpable. I know that, Marcus. That is why I need you. Look at your brother. Look at David. He is 5'7" on a good day. He has asthma. He has terrible eyesight. And now the doctor says his swimmers are basically dead on arrival. I can't have a baby with him. I can't risk having a short, sickly child. I want a winner, like you. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. David was Marcus's younger brother. He was a kind, gentle man who had always treated me with respect. He worked as a librarian and adored Tiffany. And here she was drinking wine with his brother, plotting to erase him from his own future family. Marcus laughed a low, arrogant sound. So you want the alpha seed? He said, preening. I get it. But what about David? Won't he notice if the kid comes out looking like a linebacker instead of a librarian? Tiffany waved her hand dismissively. Please. David is so desperate to be a father he won't question anything. We are doing in vitro fertilization next month. I will just swap the sample. The clinic is sloppy. I have a friend who works in the lab. She can switch David's sample for yours for $500. David will think it is a miracle. He will raise your son thinking it is his. And the best part is the baby will still have the family name. He will just be improved. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This was diabolical. It wasn't just adultery. It was paternity fraud on a massive scale. They were planning to trick a good man into raising a child that wasn't his, just because Tiffany wanted a trophy baby to match her aesthetic. Marcus swirled his wineglass. Okay, so I give you the sample. What do I get out of it, Tiff? You know I am in a tight spot. Naya is tightening the purse strings. She is watching every dime. I need capital. Tiffany smiled a predatory grin that made her look like a shark in a sundress. I already talked to my parents, she said. Daddy is looking for a place to park some tax write-offs. I told him your consulting firm is on the verge of a breakthrough. If you help me with this, if you give me the sample tomorrow, I will get Daddy to cut a check for $50,000 as a seed investment in your company. No questions asked. $50,000. That was the price of his integrity. That was the price of betraying his own brother. Marcus didn't even hesitate. He didn't think about the moral implications. He didn't think about the future legal nightmare. He just saw dollar signs. Done, Marcus said, slamming his hand on the counter. 50 grand and you get the sample. But we have to be careful. Nia can't know. She is already suspicious about the money. Tiffany scoffed. Please. Nia is too busy waddling around with milk stains on her shirt to notice anything. She is distracted. She thinks you are just a supportive brother-in-law. Besides, even if she found out, who would believe her? She is the angry black woman. I am the sweet, pregnant angel. We own the narrative, Marcus. They clicked their wine glasses together in a toast. To the future, Marcus said. To better genetics, Tiffany replied. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I had heard enough. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was a rescue mission. I had to save David. I had to save that unborn child from being a pawn in their twisted game. And I had to save myself from being legally tethered to these monsters. I looked at the timestamp on the video. It was proof, irrefutable proof of conspiracy, fraud, and moral turpitude. I saved the file to 3 different hard drives. I encrypted them. Then I sat back in the darkness and let the horror wash over me. They called me distracted. They called me a milk-stained cow. But they forgot that cows have horns, and I was about to gore them both. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I went downstairs and made breakfast. Bacon, eggs, and pancakes. The smell filled the house. When Marcus came down, he looked surprised. I thought you were on a health kick, he said, eyeing the bacon. I smiled, pouring him a cup of coffee. I decided to indulge today, I said sweetly. After all, we have so much to celebrate. I heard you have a potential investor. Marcus choked on his coffee. He coughed, his face turning red. How did you know that? He stammered. I patted his back firmly. Oh, you know me, Marcus. I have ears everywhere. I just have a feeling that big things are coming for you. Really big things. He looked at me with a flicker of fear in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. Yeah, well, I am a businessman, Nia. I make moves. I watched him eat the pancakes, unaware that he was sitting across from his executioner. He left an hour later carrying a discreet brown paper bag. I knew what was in it. I knew he was meeting Tiffany, and I let him go, because the more rope I gave him, the tighter the noose would be when I finally kicked the chair out from under him. I waited 10 minutes, then I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. David answered on the second ring. Hello, Nia, he said, his voice warm and kind. Is everything okay? Hey, David, I said, keeping my voice light. Everything is fine. Actually, everything is great. I am planning a little surprise for Marcus and Tiffany, a sort of family celebration. I really need you to be there. Can you make it to the baby's birthday party next week? Of course, Nia, David said. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Good, I said, because you really, really don't want to miss this one. I hung up the phone and looked at the empty kitchen. The camera light blinked red in the corner, a silent witness to the carnage that was about to unfold. They wanted a better bloodline. I was going to give them a bloodbath. There is a saying that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. But in my experience, you catch the biggest rats with cheese. And I was about to serve up a platter of the finest, sharpest cheddar they had ever seen. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was tired. Her eyes were shadowed from sleepless nights, and her soul was weary from betrayal. But she was not broken. I reached into my makeup bag and pulled out a tube of lipstick I hadn't worn since before the pregnancy. It was a deep blood red, a shade called Ruby Woo. It wasn't a color for a mother, it was a color for a mistress. It was a color for a warrior. I applied it carefully, tracing the bow of my lips until they looked sharp enough to cut glass. Then I practiced my smile. I didn't smile with my eyes. I smiled with my teeth. It was a mask, a beautiful, terrifying mask of submission. I walked out of the bathroom and headed downstairs. I could hear the television blaring in the living room. Loretta was watching her daytime court shows, ironically cheering as a judge berated a deadbeat dad. The hypocrisy would have made me laugh if I wasn't so focused on the kill. I walked into the room and cleared my throat. Loretta looked up, annoyed that I had interrupted her program. What do you want, Nia? She asked, snapping her gum. I took a deep breath and lowered my head. I made my shoulders slump forward slightly, making myself look smaller. I am sorry, Loretta, I said softly. My voice trembled just the right amount. I have been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of praying. You were right. Loretta paused the TV. The silence in the room was sudden and heavy. She turned her body fully toward me, her eyes narrowing like a lizard sensing a trap. But her ego was too big to see the danger. She leaned forward. I was right about what she asked. About everything, I replied. About me being hormonal. About me being difficult. I looked at the floor, feigning shame. I have been overwhelmed. The transition to motherhood has been harder than I expected. And instead of leaning on you and Marcus, I pushed you away. I was trying to control everything because I felt out of control inside. But I see now that I was disrespecting the order of the family. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Loretta's face. It was the look of a conqueror surveying a surrendered city. Well, now, she said, her voice dropping an octave into that fake, soothing tone she used at church. It takes a big person to admit when they are wrong, Nia. I have been praying for your heart to soften. God is working on you. I nodded, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. He is Loretta. He truly is. And I want to make it up to you. I know you hate my cooking. I know I haven't been feeding Marcus the way a wife should, so I went to the store this morning while you were asleep. I bought pork chops, I bought yams, I bought fresh greens. I am going to make dinner tonight, a real dinner, for the whole family. Loretta clapped her hands together. Now you are talking sense. That is the Holy Spirit moving in you, girl. Go on then. The kitchen is yours. But don't burn the cornbread this time. I spent the next 3 hours in the kitchen. But this time, I didn't feel like a servant. I felt like a chemist mixing a volatile compound. I seasoned the pork chops with heavy hand. I candied the yams until they were swimming in syrup. I made macaroni and cheese with 4 different kinds of cheese and heavy cream. It was a meal designed to induce a coma. It was a meal designed to make them feel comfortable, safe, and sluggish. When Marcus came home, the smell of fried meat hit him at the door. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie and looking suspicious. "What is going on?" he asked, eyeing the spread on the table. "Is it someone's birthday?" I walked over to him and did something I hadn't done in months. I took his briefcase from his hand and kissed him on the cheek. "Just a dinner for my husband," I cooed. "I know I have been distant lately, Marcus. I wanted to show you that I appreciate how hard you are working for us." Marcus looked at Loretta, who gave him a thumbs up from the living room. He relaxed instantly. His shoulders dropped, and his chest puffed out. "Wow, babe," he said, looking at the food. "This looks amazing. I didn't know you still knew how to cook like this." We sat down to eat. The atmosphere was bizarre. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension. There was only the sound of forks scraping against plates and satisfied chewing. They ate like wolves. They ate as if they had starved for days. And as I watched them greasing their chins with the food I had prepared, I knew it was time to drop the hammer. I put my fork down and took a sip of water. "Marcus," I said, clearing my throat, "there is something else I wanted to discuss. Something about our future." Marcus looked up, his mouth full of cornbread. "Yeah. What is it?" he asked. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of acting ability I possessed. "I heard you talking to your mom the other day," I said. "About the investment. About the seed money you need." Marcus froze. He stopped chewing. His eyes darted to Loretta. He thought I was about to confront him. I saw the panic rise in his chest, but I didn't let him speak. I continued quickly, and it made me realize something. "You are right, Marcus. I have been treating you like an employee instead of a partner. I have been holding on to the house, holding on to the money because I was scared. But the Bible says a house divided cannot stand. If you are going to be the head of this household, you need to have the power that comes with it." I reached across the table and touched his hand. His skin felt clammy. "I called my lawyer this morning," I lied smoothly. "I told him to draft up a quitclaim deed. I want to add your name to the title of the penthouse. And I want to look into using the equity to help fund your business." The sound of silverware dropping on a plate rang out. It was Loretta. She was staring at me with her mouth open. Her eyes were wide with shock and pure, unadulterated greed. "Did you say you are adding him to the deed?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. "Yes, it is his home too. He shouldn't feel like a guest here. He is the man of the house." Marcus swallowed hard. He looked like he had just won the lottery. "Babe, are you serious?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You would do that? After everything?" I smiled, that sharp red smile. "Especially after everything, Marcus. I want us to start fresh. I want to trust you completely." He stood up and came around the table, pulling me into a hug. It took everything in me not to recoil. He smelled of pork and deception. "Thank you, Nia," he whispered into my hair. "You won't regret this. This is going to change everything for us. I promise I am going to make us rich." I patted his back. "I know you will, honey. I know you will." Loretta was beaming. She raised her hands to the ceiling. "Hallelujah," she shouted. "I knew you would come to your senses. This is a breakthrough. This is a family restoration." "We need to celebrate," Marcus said, pulling away. "We need to do something big." I nodded. "I agree." You know Marcus Jr.'s first birthday is next week. I was thinking we could do a small party. But maybe we should go bigger. Marcus's eyes lit up. Bigger. Yes. Much bigger. We should rent out that steakhouse downtown, the one where all the partners go. We can invite everyone, my clients, Tiffany's parents, the whole church group. Loretta chimed in. Yes, and we can announce it there. We can announce that Marcus is officially a property owner, that he is a real businessman. It will shut up all those people who whispered that he married you for money. I pretended to hesitate. Oh, I don't know. That sounds expensive. And the paperwork won't be signed until the morning of the party. Marcus waved his hand. Don't worry about the cost. Put it on the card. Once the loan comes through, we will pay it all off. This is a branding event, Nia. We need to look successful to be successful. Let's do it. Let's show everyone that the Wilson family is on top. I looked at them. They were giddy. They were drunk on the prospect of stealing my wealth. They wanted a stage. They wanted an audience. They wanted to humiliate me by announcing his ownership in front of everyone we knew. They were digging their own graves and asking me to hand them the shovel. Okay, I said softly. Let's do it. You plan the party, Marcus. Invite whoever you want. Invite Tiffany. Invite her parents. Let's get everyone together. He kissed me again. You are the best, babe. Really. I am going to call Tiffany right now. She is going to be so happy for us. He ran out of the room to call his mistress and tell her that his wife was finally playing the fool. Loretta went back to her pork chops humming a gospel hymn. I sat there at the head of the table watching them. I pulled out my phone under the table. I sent a text to my lawyer. Draft the papers. But don't file them, and get Judge Robinson on the line. The party is on. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The red lipstick was still perfect. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the party. It was going to be a celebration, all right. A celebration of their absolute and total destruction. The week leading up to the birthday party was a blur of calculated movement. I felt less like a mother and more like a covert operative. While Marcus and Loretta were busy picking out balloon arches and arguing over the seating chart, I was busy dismantling their lives piece by piece. My first stop was a nondescript office building in downtown Atlanta. The sign on the door said heavy metal security, but inside sat the best private investigator in the state. He slid a manila envelope across the mahogany desk. It was thick. It contained photos of Marcus and Tiffany at lunch. It contained bank statements showing the transfers to her account. And most damning of all, it contained a transcript of their conversation about the paternity fraud. I didn't cry when I looked at them. I just nodded. Good work, I said. Keep the file open. I want high-resolution photos of everyone at the party. I want their faces clear when the bomb drops. My next stop was the courthouse. But I wasn't there to file papers yet. I was there for a private audience. I walked through the metal detectors and navigated the marble hallways until I reached a set of heavy double doors. The brass plaque read, Honorable Justice Robinson. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't seen her since that day on the subway. I didn't know if she would remember me. I didn't know if she would help. But when the secretary ushered me in, Judge Robinson stood up from behind her massive desk. She looked exactly the same. Immaculate silver hair, eyes that could see through your soul. She didn't smile. She just walked around the desk and pointed to a chair. You didn't run, she said simply. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. No, Your Honor, I replied, sitting down and placing my laptop on her desk. I couldn't run. Not yet. I had to gather ammunition. I opened the laptop and turned the screen toward her. I need you to watch this. For the next 20 minutes, the chambers were silent, except for the audio coming from my computer. Judge Robinson watched the footage from my living room. She watched Marcus grab my arm. She watched Loretta throw my food in the sink. She listened to them plotting to steal my house and swap the DNA sample. Her expression never changed, but the energy in the room shifted. The air grew heavy with a righteous fury. When the video ended, she took off her glasses and cleaned them slowly. "This is not just emotional abuse," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "This is conspiracy. This is fraud. And the way they treat that child." She pointed to the screen where Loretta was ignoring my crying son to watch TV. "That is neglect." She opened a drawer and pulled out a stamped document. "I usually require a hearing for a restraining order," she said, picking up a heavy fountain pen. "But given the immediate threat to your safety and the criminal nature of their conspiracy, I am granting an emergency ex parte order. This will remove them from the residence immediately. It gives you full temporary custody, and it prevents them from coming within 500 feet of you or the child." She signed the paper with a flourish. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. She handed it to me. "Do not serve this yet," she instructed. "Wait until you have them all in one place. Wait until the police are there to enforce it. You want to do this at the party, don't you?" I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. They want a show. I want to give them a finale." Judge Robinson finally smiled. It was a terrifyingly approving smile. "Good girl," she said. "I will have 2 officers on standby outside the venue. When you give the signal, they will come in. Go get your justice." I walked out of the courthouse with the court order burning a hole in my purse. I felt lighter. I felt invincible. I had the law on my side. I had the truth on my side. Now I just needed to pay the bill. When I got home, the house was in chaos. It was like a circus had exploded in my living room. Loretta was on the phone yelling at a caterer. "No, I said lobster," she screamed. "I don't care if it is expensive. My son is buying the penthouse. We need lobster tails and filet mignon. We are high-class people." She hung up and turned to me. "Oh, there you are, Nia. Where have you been? Never mind, I don't care. We need to talk about the guest list." She shoved a piece of paper into my hand. It was 3 pages long. I scanned the names. I saw the entire choir from her church. I saw her bridge club. I saw cousins I hadn't seen in 10 years. I saw Marcus's fraternity brothers. There were easily 100 people on this list. "Loretta," I said, feigning shock. "This is a lot of people. This is supposed to be a first birthday party. Most of these people don't even know Marcus Jr." Loretta rolled her eyes. "It is not just a birthday party, Nia. It is a coming out party. It is Marcus's moment. We need witnesses. We need people to see that we have made it. Besides, I already invited them. You can't uninvite the church mothers. It would be a sin." Marcus walked in looking stressed, but excited. He was holding a stack of invoices. "Babe, the venue needs the final payment," he said. "And the caterer. And the open bar. Since we are waiting on the loan to clear, can you handle it for now? It is about $20,000. $20,000. For a 1-year-old's birthday. They were insane. They were spending money like water because they thought it was my money. They thought the well was bottomless. I looked at Marcus. He was sweating. He was terrified I would say no. He was terrified his house of cards would fall down before he could show it off. I smiled. "Of course, honey," I said. "I want this night to be perfect for you. I want you to shine." I pulled out my wallet, but I didn't reach for my usual black card. I reached into the back slot and pulled out a shiny platinum card. It was a card I had opened in Marcus's name 3 years ago, when his credit score was briefly decent. I had added myself as an authorized user, but he was the primary account holder. He had completely forgotten it existed. The limit was exactly $25,000, and the interest rate was predatory. "Here," I said, handing the card to the event planner who was standing nervously by the door. "Put it all on this: the venue, the food, the flowers, the champagne tower. Everything." Marcus looked at the card. He didn't recognize it. He assumed it was one of my many business accounts. He didn't ask questions. He was just relieved. "You are the best, Nia," he said, kissing my forehead. "I promise I will pay this back with the first check from the investors." I watched the planner insert the card into the mobile chip reader. I watched the little dots appear on the screen processing the transaction. I held my breath. If it declined, the game was over. But then the machine beeped. Approved. A receipt churned out. $20,450. Charged to Mr. Marcus Wilson. I took the receipt and folded it neatly. I handed it to Marcus. "Keep this for your records, babe," I said. "It is a business expense, right?" He shoved it in his pocket without looking. "Absolutely. Tax write-off." Loretta let out a whoop of joy. "We are going to have a ball," she yelled. "I am going to wear my gold sequin dress. Everyone is going to die when they see us." I stood there watching them celebrate. They were high-fiving. They were dancing. They had just spent $20,000 of debt that they would never be able to repay. Marcus was going to walk out of that party not just homeless and divorced, but financially crippled for the next decade. "I am going to go upstairs and pick out my outfit," I said quietly. "You do that," Loretta yelled after me. "Wear something nice, Nia. Try to look like you belong next to my son." I walked up the stairs feeling the weight of the court order in my bag and the lightness of my own bank account which remained untouched. I wasn't going to wear something nice. I was going to wear something symbolic. I walked into my closet and pushed aside the beige and gray suits Marcus liked me to wear. I reached into the back and pulled out a dress I had bought in Paris years ago. It was black, structurally sharp, and it looked exactly like something a widow would wear to the funeral of her enemy. I laid the dress on the bed. Next to it, I placed the folder from the private investigator, and next to that, I placed the court order. My outfit was complete. The party was tomorrow, and I was ready to dance on the ashes of their expectations. The steakhouse was a temple of excess. It was the kind of place where the waiters wore tuxedos, and the air smelled of aged beef and expensive cologne. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears, casting a golden glow over the room that Marcus had rented out entirely. I stood at the entrance in my black dress, watching the guests arrive. It was a sea of church hats, designer suits, and fake smiles. Everyone was there. The choir members who had judged me for working too much, the fraternity brothers who had encouraged Marcus's worst behavior, and of course Tiffany's parents, the wealthy investors, who looked around the room with an air of bored appraisal. They were all drinking champagne that cost $20 a glass. Champagne that they thought Marcus was paying for. Champagne that was actually being charged to a credit card that was slowly ticking like a time bomb in Marcus's pocket. I walked up to the hostess stand where a young woman was holding the seating chart. She looked at me and then down at the list. Her face flushed pink. "Mrs. Wilson," she stammered. "I am so sorry. I tried to tell them, but your mother-in-law insisted on the arrangement." I looked at the chart. Table 1 was the head table. It was situated on a raised platform in the center of the room. The names listed were Marcus Wilson, Loretta Wilson, Tiffany Davis, and David Davis. I scanned the list for my name. I found it at Table 9. Table 9 was in the back corner right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen and the hallway leading to the restrooms. And I wasn't sitting with family. I was sitting with the nanny, the photographer, and the pastor's assistant. I looked at the hostess, who looked ready to cry from secondhand embarrassment. "Do not apologize," I said calmly. "It is perfect. It gives me a better view of the show." I walked through the crowded room. Heads turned as I passed. I knew what they were thinking. Why is the wife walking alone? Why is she wearing black to a birthday party? Why does she look like she is walking to an execution? I held my head high. I didn't stop to greet anyone. I walked straight to the back corner and took my seat next to Mrs. Higgins, the nanny we had hired to help with the baby during the event. Mrs. Higgins looked horrified. "Mrs. Wilson, this is not right," she whispered, clutching her purse. "You should be up there. You are the mother. You are the wife." I poured myself a glass of water. "It is okay, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "Just keep the baby happy. He is the only innocent person in this room." From my vantage point, I had a clear line of sight to the head table. It was a masterclass in disrespect. Marcus sat in the center looking like a king on his throne. To his right was Loretta beaming like she had just won a pageant. And to his left in the seat that should have been mine was Tiffany. Tiffany was wearing white, a fitted white lace dress that looked suspiciously bridal. She was leaning into Marcus, laughing at everything he said, touching his arm, brushing imaginary lint off his shoulder. David, her actual husband, sat on the other side of her, looking small and ignored. He was staring at his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was practically sitting in his brother's lap. The room quieted down as the appetizers were served. Waiters circulated with trays of lobster bisque and Wagyu beef sliders. I watched Marcus survey the room. He looked powerful. He looked rich. He had no idea that he was legally destitute. After an hour of mingling and eating, the music lowered. A spotlight hit the head table. Marcus stood up, tapping his spoon against his crystal glass. The sound rang out sharp and clear, silencing the room. "Thank you everyone for coming," he boomed, his voice projected by the microphone. "What a night. What a gathering. I look around this room and I see love. I see support. I see the village that it takes to raise a child and build an empire." The crowd applauded politely. Marcus smiled, soaking in the adoration. "I want to take a moment to thank the people who made this possible," he continued. "First and foremost, my mother, Loretta." Loretta stood up and waved her handkerchief. The church crowd cheered. "Amen." "Loretta," someone shouted. "Mom, you are my rock," Marcus said. "You prayed for me when I had nothing. You guided me. You taught me that a man is nothing without his family. This party, this success, it is all because of your vision." He turned to his left. "And I want to thank Tiffany." My stomach turned. Tiffany stood up, blushing prettily. "Tiffany, you have been a sister to me in every sense of the word," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a husky register that made me want to vomit. "Your support, your taste, your belief in my business. It means the world to me. You helped me navigate the transition to fatherhood. You picked out the decorations. You made this house a home." He paused for dramatic effect. "And to my brother David, thank you for sharing her with us." David gave a weak wave, looking uncomfortable. And finally, Marcus said almost as an afterthought, "To Nia." He didn't look at me. He looked over the heads of the crowd toward the back of the room. He didn't ask me to stand. "Thank you for giving birth to my son," he said. "You gave me an heir, and for that I will always be grateful." That was it. No "I love you," no "thank you for paying the bills," no "my beautiful wife," just a thank you for my biological function. I was an incubator, a vessel he had used and discarded to the back of the room near the kitchen trash. The room was silent. Even the guests felt the coldness of it. A few people turned to look at me, expecting me to cry or storm out. I did neither. I raised my glass of water in a mock toast and took a sip. My face was a mask of stone, but the humiliation wasn't over. Loretta grabbed the microphone from Marcus. She wasn't content with just a speech. She wanted a coronation. "Oh, wait, wait, wait!" she yelled, her voice shrill with excitement. "We have announcements. Big announcements. You all know that the Wilson family is blessed, but God has been pouring out double portions lately." She put her arm around Marcus. "Today I am proud to announce that my son is officially stepping into his destiny. For years he has worked hard, and tomorrow morning he will be signing the papers to become the official co-owner of the penthouse." The room erupted in applause. People whistled. I watched Tiffany's parents nod approvingly, believing their investment was secure. I watched Marcus puff out his chest, his ego swelling to the size of the room. He truly believed it. He believed that my submission the night before was real. He believed the house was his. Loretta waited for the applause to die down. "But that is not all," she teased, her eyes twinkling maliciously. "We have another blessing on the way. A secret blessing." She turned to Tiffany. Tiffany stood up again, placing a hand on her flat stomach. She looked at Marcus, then at David, then back at the crowd. We are praying that by next year, little Marcus Jr. will have a cousin, Loretta announced. Tiffany and David are starting their IVF journey next week, and let me tell you, we have secured the best doctors, the best science, and we are confident that this baby is going to have the strong Wilson genes. She emphasized the word Wilson. She looked directly at Marcus when she said it. It was a dog whistle, a coded message that only the three of them understood. She was telling the room that the baby would be a Wilson, not a Davis. She was publicly celebrating the paternity fraud they were about to commit against David. Tiffany giggled and leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. Ideally a boy, right Marcus, she said into the microphone. A big, strong boy, just like his uncle. Marcus laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist. You know it, Tiff. We need more linebackers in the family. I looked at David. He was smiling, tearing up a little, thinking about becoming a father. He had no idea that his wife and his brother were laughing in his face. He had no idea that they were planning to erase him from his own child's biology. The cruelty was so absolute it was almost breathtaking. They had taken everything. My money, my home, my dignity. And now they were coming for David's future. I looked down at the table. The white tablecloth was crisp, the silverware was heavy. I reached into my purse and touched the cold metal of the USB drive containing the video files. I touched the paper edge of the restraining order. The waiter came by to refill my water. Can I get you anything else, ma'am? He asked, looking at me with pity. I looked up at him. My eyes were dry, my hands were steady. Yes, I said. I would like the microphone. The waiter looked confused. The microphone, ma'am. They are doing speeches. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my black dress. I picked up my clutch. I know, I said. And I have a speech to make. I walked away from table 9. I didn't walk quickly. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a predator emerging from the shadows. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor cut through the chatter. Click, click, click. Heads turned. The applause died down. People started to whisper. Loretta saw me coming. She frowned, shielding her eyes against the spotlight. Nia, sit down, she hissed into the microphone, forgetting it was still on. We aren't done yet. I didn't stop. I walked right up to the platform. I walked up the stairs. I stood directly in front of Marcus and Tiffany, who were still huddled together like lovers. I reached out and took the microphone from Loretta's hand. She was so shocked she let go without a fight. I turned to face the room. I looked at the 100 faces staring back at me. I looked at the church mothers. I looked at the fraternity brothers. I looked at the investors. Thank you, Loretta, I said, my voice booming through the speakers, calm and terrifying. That was a lovely announcement. But you forgot a few details. And since we are sharing family secrets, I think it is only fair that I share mine too. I signaled to the AV technician in the back of the room. I had tipped him $200 before the party started to connect my laptop to the main projector. Hit it, I said. The giant screen behind the head table flickered to life. The photo of Marcus and Tiffany changed. It was replaced by a grainy black and white image of a kitchen. The room went deadly silent. I turned to Marcus. His face had gone the color of ash. Happy birthday, son, I whispered to the baby in the nanny's arms. Daddy got you a party, but Mommy got you the truth. The microphone felt heavy in my hand like a gavel in a courtroom. The silence in the steakhouse was absolute. A minute ago, the air had been filled with the clinking of expensive crystal and the murmurs of adoration for my husband. Now the only sound was the hum of the projector fan and the thudding of my own heart, which had slowed to a cold, steady rhythm. I looked at Marcus. He was frozen, his hands still wrapped around Tiffany's waist, but his eyes were locked on me. He looked like a deer in headlights, realizing too late that the car wasn't going to swerve. I took a step closer to the head table. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, a sharp staccato rhythm that echoed off the walls. I didn't look angry. I didn't look hysterical. I looked like I was leading a board meeting where I was about to fire the entire executive team. You know, Marcus, I began, my voice smooth and amplified, filling every corner of the room. You have always loved a good show. You love the lights. You love the applause. You love the feeling of people looking at you with envy. So when you asked me to sign the papers to put your name on the deed of our home, I thought about it. I really did. I thought about what kind of gift would be appropriate for a man who treats his wife the way you treat me. Marcus let out a nervous laugh, trying to break the tension. He stood up, reaching for the microphone. Okay, babe. That is enough, he said, his smile tight and straining at the edges. We can talk about this later. You are tired. I pulled the microphone back out of his reach. I am not tired, Marcus, I said sharply. I am just getting started. You wanted an announcement. You wanted everyone to know who owns the penthouse. You wanted to flex for your fraternity brothers and your potential investors. So let's give them what they want. Let's show them the paperwork. I pointed the clicker at the screen. The grainy image of the kitchen vanished. In its place, a high-resolution scan of a legal document appeared. It was magnified so that even the people in the back row by the kitchen could read the bold header. It did not say warranty deed. It did not say joint tenancy. It read in massive block letters, "The Nia Wilson Revocable Living Trust." I heard a gasp ripple through the room. A few of the real estate investors in the crowd leaned forward, squinting at the screen. They knew what that meant. Loretta, however, looked confused. She squinted at the text. "Trust," she muttered. "What does that mean? Does it mean he is trusted with the house?" I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "No, Loretta," I said, turning to face her. "It means exactly the opposite. It means that the property located at 1500 Peachtree Street is not owned by Marcus Wilson. It is not owned by Nia Wilson. It is owned by a separate legal entity created 3 years before I even met your son. An entity designed to protect my assets from liabilities. And unfortunately for you, Marcus, you are a liability." Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "But you said we were signing the papers tomorrow," he stammered. "You said you were adding me." I shook my head slowly, pitying his stupidity. "I said we would discuss the house. And we are discussing it. You see, everyone Marcus has been telling you that he bought this house. He has been telling you that he is a real estate mogul. But the truth is, Marcus has never paid a mortgage bill in his life. He has never paid a property tax bill. He doesn't even pay for the electricity that powers his video games." I walked over to the screen, tracing the lines of the document with my hand. "This trust has very specific bylaws." I continued, my voice taking on the cadence of a professor teaching a class to slow students. "It states that the beneficiary, which is me, has sole discretion over who resides in the property." But here's the interesting part. I clicked the button again. The screen zoomed in on a paragraph at the bottom of the second page. It was highlighted in yellow. Clause 4, Section B, the Morality and Conduct Clause. I read it aloud, my voice ringing out like a judgment. "In the event that any resident of the property engages in acts of infidelity, spousal abuse, financial fraud, or conspiracy to defraud the primary beneficiary, their right to residency is immediately revoked. Not in 30 days. Not in 60 days. Immediately." I turned back to Marcus. His face had gone from ash gray to a sickly shade of green. He knew. He knew exactly what he had done. He knew about the credit cards. He knew about Tiffany. He knew about the way he yanked me on the subway. "You see, Marcus," I said, stepping closer to the edge of the platform, "you thought you were waiting for me to sign the house over to you. You thought if you just played nice for a week, if you just ate my cooking and smiled at me, I would hand you a $3 million asset. But you didn't read the fine print of our marriage. You didn't realize that while you were playing checkers with your mother, I was playing chess with my lawyer." Loretta stood up, knocking her chair over. "This is illegal," she shrieked. "You can't do this. He is your husband. What is yours is his. The Bible says—" I cut her off. "The Bible says thou shalt not steal, Loretta," I shouted back, my voice cracking like a whip. and it certainly says thou shalt not covet. You have spent the last year coveting my house, coveting my money, and coveting my peace. You thought because I was quiet I was weak. You thought because I was a new mother I was vulnerable, but you forgot that I am a CFO. I manage risk for a living, and you two are the worst investment I have ever made. I turned back to the crowd. The room was paralyzed, the waiters had stopped serving, the bartender had stopped shaking drinks. Everyone was staring at Marcus, who looked like he was shrinking in his suit. And speaking of investments, I said, looking directly at Tiffany's parents, who were sitting at table 2 looking horrified. Mr. and Mrs. Davis, I believe Marcus asked you for $50,000. He told you it was for his consulting firm. He told you he needed seed money for a new project. I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. This time, it was a bank statement. A statement from an offshore account that Marcus had opened 2 days ago. Here is that account, I said. It is empty. But look at the pending transfer. It is not going to a business account. It is not going to marketing or development. It is set to transfer to a fertility clinic in Sandy Springs. Tiffany gasped loudly, clutching her stomach. David, who had been sitting quietly next to her, stood up slowly. His face was pale. What? What is that? He asked, his voice trembling. Why is money going to a fertility clinic, Marcus? I looked at David with genuine sadness. He was the collateral damage in this war. He was a good man who had married a snake. I am sorry, David, I said softly. I really am. But you need to know what your wife and your brother have been planning. You need to know why they have been so close lately, why they have been whispering in corners, why Marcus is suddenly so interested in your IVF journey. Marcus lunged for me. He scrambled over the table, knocking over wine glasses and centerpieces. Stop it, Nia! He screamed, his eyes wild with panic. Don't do this! Stop it right now! But he was too slow, and he was too weak. The 2 security guards I had hired stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen. They were massive men with necks as thick as tree trunks. They didn't touch him. They just stepped in front of me, crossing their arms, forming a human wall between me and my husband. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him through the gap between the guards. I told you, Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than his screaming. I told you I had a gift for you. I gave you the truth about the house. Now let me give you the truth about yourself. I clicked the remote one more time. The screen went black for a second, and then the video started. It wasn't the kitchen video this time. It was the video from the night before. The video of Marcus and Tiffany drinking my wine. The video where they discussed the alpha seed. I stepped back, letting the audio fill the room. I watched as the color drained from David's face. I watched as Tiffany's parents covered their mouths in horror. I watched as the church mothers gasped and clutched their pearls. And I watched Marcus. He stopped fighting the guards. He stopped screaming. He just slumped against the table, looking at the screen, looking at his own destruction playing out in high definition. The trust owns the house, Marcus, I said over the audio of his betrayal. And the trust has a zero-tolerance policy for garbage. You are evicted, effective immediately. You have exactly 0 hours to vacate the premises. But don't worry about packing. I already had your bags packed. They are sitting on the curb outside, right next to the trash where they belong. I lowered the microphone. My hand was shaking slightly now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the kill. I had taken away his shelter. I had taken away his pride. And in about 30 seconds, I was going to take away his freedom. But first, I had to let the video finish. I had to let everyone hear exactly what he thought about his own brother. Because financial ruin was one thing, but social annihilation, that was the true payoff. And I was just getting started. You might expect a woman caught in an affair to cry. You might expect her to beg for forgiveness or try to explain, but Tiffany was not that kind of woman. Tiffany was a narcissist who had been cornered, and like a rat in a trap, she decided to bite. She stood up from the table, her face flushed a deep, ugly crimson that clashed with her white lace dress. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her hand shaking so violently that her diamond bracelets rattled. "You are evil!" she screamed, her voice cracking under the strain. "You are a calculated, jealous, bitter woman. You planned this whole thing. You let us spend this money. You let us invite these people just to humiliate us. How could you be so cruel? You sat there eating dinner with us while you were recording us. You are a sociopath, Nia. A complete sociopath." The room gasped at her audacity. She was the mistress. She was the one plotting to steal my home and my husband. Yet here she was trying to paint herself as the victim of my cruelty. It was a masterclass in deflection. I didn't yell back. I didn't lose my composure. I simply looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. Calculated, I repeated my voice amplified by the microphone calmly dominating her shrill screaming. "You call me calculated, Tiffany. That is interesting. Because I am not the one who calculated the exact date of my ovulation window to trick my husband. I am not the one who calculated the cost of bribing a lab technician. And I am certainly not the one who calculated that my brother-in-law's DNA was worth $50,000. Tiffany froze. Her mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. She realized in that split second that I knew everything, not just about the affair, but about the baby. I turned back to the crowd. "You see, Tiffany thinks I am cruel for exposing the truth," I said. "But I think cruelty is letting a good man raise a child that isn't his. I think cruelty is looking your husband in the eye and telling him he isn't good enough to be a father while you sleep with his brother." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen behind me shifted. The video that began playing was the one I had recorded just 2 nights ago. The audio was crystal clear. It boomed through the steakhouse speakers, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. On the screen, Tiffany was leaning close to Marcus. Her voice filled the room. "David is 5'7" on a good day. He has asthma. He has terrible eyesight. I can't risk having a short, sickly child. I want a winner, like you." A collective intake of breath sucked the air out of the room. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the nanny, cover her mouth with her hand. I saw the pastor look down at his plate, shaking his head. The video continued. Marcus's voice was arrogant and dismissive. "So you want the alpha seed? What about David? Won't he notice?" And then Tiffany's reply, the nail in her coffin. "David is so desperate to be a father he won't question anything. I will just swap the sample." The clinic is sloppy. I paused the video right there. I froze the image on Tiffany's face, twisted in a conspiratorial sneer. I didn't need to play the rest. The room had heard enough. I looked down at table 1. David was sitting perfectly still. He looked like he had been turned to stone. His face was devoid of color. He was staring at the freeze frame of his wife and his brother plotting to erase him. He was a librarian, a gentle soul, a man who had probably never raised a fist in his life, but grief has a way of turning into rage when it is set on fire by betrayal. David stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, toppling over with a crash. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Marcus. Marcus saw him coming. He tried to stand up. "Dave, listen, man," he stammered, holding his hands up. "It's not what it sounds like. We were just talking. It was just a joke." David didn't speak. He didn't scream. He walked up the 3 steps to the platform with a terrifying purpose. He walked past Tiffany, who reached out to grab his arm. "David, please," she wailed. He shook her off with a violent jerk that sent her stumbling back into her chair. "Don't touch me," he growled. His voice was low, but in the silent room it sounded like thunder. He reached Marcus. Marcus was 6'3", a former linebacker. David was 5'7", but in that moment David looked like a giant. He didn't hesitate. He pulled his arm back and delivered a punch that carried a lifetime of brotherly love turning into hatred. His fist connected with Marcus's jaw with a sickening crack. It was the sound of bone meeting bone. Marcus crumbled. He didn't fight back. He fell backward, crashing into the table, sending plates and glasses shattering to the floor. The alpha male, lay there on the ground groaning, clutching his face, while the weak brother stood over him breathing hard, his knuckles split and bleeding. "You were my brother!" David screamed, tears finally streaming down his face. "You were my blood, and you sold me out for $50,000. You were going to let me raise your son and laugh at me." He kicked Marcus in the ribs, hard. The security guards I had hired stepped forward, but I held up a hand. "Let him finish," I signaled. This wasn't violence. This was justice. Tiffany was sobbing now, loud, hysterical cries that sounded fake even in her distress. "David, I did it for us," she screamed. "I wanted us to have a perfect baby." David spun around to face her. "For us," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You didn't do this for us. You did this because you hate me. You hate who I am. You married me for my stability, but you wanted him. Well, you can have him, Tiffany. You can have the alpha, because I am done." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring box. It wasn't a wedding ring. It was a gift he had probably planned to give her that night to celebrate the IVF. He threw it at her. It hit her in the chest and bounced onto the floor, rolling under the table. "I am filing for divorce in the morning," David said. "And I am suing you for paternity fraud. Don't come home. I will burn the house down before I let you step foot in it again." He turned and walked out of the room. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. No one said a word. They just watched a broken man walk away with his dignity, while the people who broke him lay in the wreckage. I looked over at table 2. Mr. and Mrs. Davis, Tiffany's parents, were standing up. Mr. Davis looked like he was having a cardiac event. His face was purple. He had heard the recording. He heard that his $50,000 investment was actually a bribe for his son-in-law to commit fraud. He was a businessman. He knew that this recording was evidence. If this got out, his reputation would be destroyed. He looked at Tiffany, who was on the floor trying to crawl toward him. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, reaching out a hand. "Daddy, help me. He is crazy." Mr. Davis looked at his daughter with cold detachment. "You told me that money was for a consulting firm," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "You involved me in a conspiracy, Tiffany. Do you know what happens if the SEC finds out I am moving money to fund illegal medical procedures?" He turned to his wife. "Get the car," he ordered. "But Daddy," Tiffany wailed. "We are leaving." Mr. Davis barked. "You are on your own, Tiffany. Do not call me until you have fixed this mess. And do not expect another dime from me. If you are going to act like trash, you can live like trash." He turned and marched out, leaving his daughter sobbing on the floor in her ruined white dress amidst the broken glass and spilled lobster bisque. I stood on the platform looking down at them. Marcus was bleeding from his lip, moaning in pain. Tiffany was abandoned by her husband and her parents. Loretta was sitting in her chair in a catatonic state, clutching her chest, mumbling "Jesus" over and over again. The room was buzzing now. The shock had worn off and the gossip had begun. Phones were out. People were recording. This was going to be on every group chat in Atlanta by morning. I raised the microphone one last time. "Well," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, "I think that concludes the entertainment portion of the evening. The food has been paid for, so please enjoy the steak. I hear the lobster is excellent. As for the Wilson family..." I looked down at Marcus, who was looking up at me with one swollen eye. "We are checking out." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud feedback screech that made everyone cover their ears. I didn't look back. I walked down the stairs past the sobbing Tiffany, past the bleeding Marcus, and straight toward the exit. The security guards fell in step behind me, flanking me like a queen leaving her court. I walked out into the cool night air. The valet saw me coming and ran to get my car. I took a deep breath. The air didn't smell like grease anymore. It didn't smell like lies. It smelled like freedom. Behind me, the doors of the steakhouse burst open. 2 police officers were walking in past me. They were there to serve the restraining order and arrest Marcus for the credit card fraud I had reported an hour ago. "Excuse me, ma'am," one officer said, tipping his hat. "Is Marcus Wilson inside?" I smiled. "He sure is, officer. He is the one on the floor. You can't miss him. He looks like a man who just lost everything." I got into my car and locked the doors. I checked my phone. One text message from David. Thank you. I put the phone down and drove away. I didn't go home. I went to a hotel, the nicest hotel in the city. I ordered room service. I drank a glass of wine. And for the first time in a year, I slept without a camera watching me. The war was over. The enemy was decimated. And I was the last woman standing. I thought I was done. I thought I had drained the swamp and exposed the snakes. But I had forgotten about the matriarch. As I turned to walk away from the wreckage of the head table, Loretta Wilson finally snapped. The shock that had held her frozen in her chair shattered and was replaced by a feral, unholy rage. She didn't look like a church mother anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. She let out a scream that sounded like tearing metal and lunged at me. She scrambled over the broken glass and the spilled food, moving faster than a woman of 60 with bad knees should be able to move. Her wig was askew, her eyes were bulging, and her hands were clawed, ready to tear my face off. "You devil!" she shrieked, spitting flying from her mouth. "You ruined everything! You destroyed my family! I will kill you! You ungrateful heifer! I will kill you with my bare hands!" The crowd gasped and surged backward, but I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my hands to defend myself. I didn't have to. The two security guards who had been flanking me stepped forward in perfect unison. They caught Loretta by the arms just inches before she could reach me. She thrashed against them, kicking and screaming, cursing in a way that would have gotten her banned from the sanctuary she loved so much. "Let me go!" she screamed, kicking her legs in the air. "That is my son's wife. I have a right to discipline her. She needs to be taught a lesson." I turned back around slowly. I looked at the woman who had made my life a living hell for the past year. I looked at the woman who had thrown my food in the sink. The woman who had treated me like an incubator. And I decided that I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to bury her. "Hold her," I said to the guards. They tightened their grip, forcing Loretta to stand still. She was panting heavily, her chest heaving beneath her gold-sequined dress. She glared at me with pure hatred. "You think you are smart, Nia," she hissed. "You think you won. But you will never keep my grandson. I will sue you for custody. I will tell the court you are unfit. I will tell them you are crazy. I will take that baby and raise him the right way. The Wilson way." I looked at her and I smiled. It was a sad smile, because I knew what was coming next. And I knew that after the next 2 minutes, she would never see Marcus Jr. again. "You want to talk about fitness, Loretta?" I asked, my voice calm and deadly. "You want to talk about raising children? Let's talk about that. Because while I was gathering evidence on your son and his mistress, I found something else. Something I didn't expect. Something that made me sick to my stomach." I walked back to the podium. The laptop was still connected. The screen was still on. "I thought you were just a mean old woman, Loretta," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I thought you were just greedy and manipulative. But I was wrong. You are dangerous." I clicked the remote. The video on the screen changed. It was footage from the nursery camera. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. The room was dim lit only by the nightlight. Marcus Jr. was sleeping in his crib. Loretta walked into the frame. She looked around, ensuring no one was watching. She wasn't holding a bottle. She wasn't holding a blanket. She walked over to the crib and looked down at my son. He was sleeping peacefully. On the screen, Loretta reached her hand into the crib. The audience leaned in, confused. Was she fixing his blanket? Was she checking his diaper? No. The camera zoomed in. Loretta's fingers found the soft flesh of the baby's inner arm. And then she twisted. She pinched him hard. On the video, the baby jerked awake and started screaming in pain. It was a high-pitched shriek of distress. The reaction in the steakhouse was visceral. A collective cry of horror rose from the room. A woman at table 4 covered her mouth and started sobbing. But the video wasn't over. On the screen, Loretta didn't look upset. She smiled. She picked up the crying baby and started rocking him aggressively. There, she cooed, but her voice on the recording was cold. See, your mama doesn't hear you. Only Grandma hears you. Only Grandma loves you. Mama is too busy working. Mama doesn't care if you hurt. Only Grandma can fix it. She had hurt him on purpose. She had inflicted pain on an infant, just so she could be the savior. Just so she could validate her own narrative that I was a neglectful mother, and she was the primary caregiver. It was Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It was abuse. Loretta stopped thrashing. She went limp in the guard's grip. Her face turned a color I had never seen before, a sickly gray. "Turn it off," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "That is not real. You doctored that. I didn't turn it off." I clicked to the next clip. This one was from the kitchen. It was the footage of her throwing my healthy food into the sink. The food I needed to recover. The food I needed to feed her grandson. "Ungrateful heifer," she said on the video as she scraped the pork chops down the drain. "Let her starve. Maybe she will lose that baby weight if she stops eating." And then the final clip. The one that started it all. The screen showed the grainy footage from the subway car. I had obtained it from the transit authority with a subpoena. It showed me 9 months pregnant holding my back. It showed Marcus yanking me out of the seat. And it showed Loretta. She didn't just sit down. On the video you could see her laughing. You could see her look at me stumbling and then look at Marcus and give him a nod of approval. You could see her mouth the words, "Good boy." I paused the video on her face. That smug, satisfied face. I walked down the stairs of the platform and stood right in front of her. The room was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't shock. It was judgment. The church members who had praised her were looking at her with revulsion. The investors were looking at her like she was a criminal. "You aren't a grandmother, Loretta," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You are a predator. You hurt a defenseless baby to feed your own ego. You starved a nursing mother to feed your own control. You encouraged your son to abuse his wife because it made you feel powerful." I leaned in close so only she could hear the next part. "You said you would sue for custody. You said you would take my son. Well, Loretta, look around you. There isn't a judge in this country who would give you custody of a hamster, let alone a human child. You are done." Loretta looked around the room. She saw the faces of her friends. She saw the pastor turning his back on her. She saw the devastation of her reputation. And she started to cry. Not fake tears this time. Real ugly tears of self-pity. "I didn't mean to," she sobbed. "I just wanted him to love me best. I just wanted to be needed." "That is not love," I said, stepping back. "That is sickness. That is—" I nodded to the security guards. "Get her out of my sight." But before they could drag her out, the front doors opened wide. The police officers I had spoken to outside marched in. They weren't alone. Behind them walked a woman in a gray suit holding a briefcase. It was a social worker from Child Protective Services. "Loretta Wilson," one of the officers said, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for child abuse and domestic violence." The social worker stepped forward holding a clipboard. "And we have an emergency order removing Marcus Wilson Jr. from your care and the care of Marcus Wilson Sr. pending a full investigation. The mother, Nia Wilson, retains full and sole custody." Loretta screamed as the officer slapped the handcuffs on her wrists. The sound of the metal clicking shut was the final note in her symphony of destruction. "My baby," she wailed as they dragged her past the stunned guests. "Marcus, do something." But Marcus was still on the floor nursing his broken jaw. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't save her. He couldn't even save himself. I watched them go. I watched my husband and my mother-in-law, the two people who were supposed to be my family, being led away in cuffs. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Mrs. Higgins, the nanny. She was crying, holding my son tight. "He is okay, Mrs. Wilson," she said softly. "He is sleeping. He didn't hear any of it." I took my son from her arms. I held him close, smelling his sweet baby scent. He was safe. Finally, he was safe. I looked at the crowd one last time. "Go home," I said to them. "The party is over." I walked out of the steakhouse carrying my son. The flashing blue lights of the police cars illuminated the night. I saw Loretta being shoved into the back of a squad car. She looked old. She looked small. She looked pathetic. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt clean. It was like a cancer had been cut out of my life. It was painful, and there would be scars, but I would survive. And more importantly, my son would thrive. I walked to my car where the valet was waiting with the door open. He looked at me with awe. "You are a badass, ma'am," he whispered. I smiled as I buckled my son into his car seat. "No," I said softly, kissing my son's forehead. "I am just a mother, and God help anyone who forgets that." The flashing blue and red lights painted the steakhouse walls in a chaotic rhythm of distress. It was the perfect lighting for the closing scene of Marcus Wilson's delusions of grandeur. I stood by the valet stand, unwilling to miss the final act. I watched as the heavy oak doors swung open and the silence in the room broke once again. It wasn't just the police. Walking in front of the officers, moving with the grace of a queen and the authority of an executioner, was Judge Robinson. She didn't look like the woman on the subway anymore. She looked like the law personified. She walked straight up to where Marcus was trying to wipe the blood from his lip. She didn't offer him a tissue. She offered him a piece of paper. "Marcus Wilson," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the stunned crowd. "I am Judge Evelyn Robinson of the Superior Court. You have been served with an immediate ex parte protective order." Marcus blinked, looking at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. "What is this?" he mumbled. "It means," Judge Robinson continued, "that you are legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Nia Wilson or your son, Marcus Wilson, Jr. It means you are prohibited from entering the residence at 1500 Peachtree Street, and since you are currently standing about 20 feet from your wife, you are in violation of a court order right now." Marcus looked around wildly. "But that is my house," he shouted, his voice rising in panic. "My stuff is there. My life is there. You can't just kick me out." "I can, and I did," Judge Robinson replied calmly. "You have exactly 5 minutes to vacate these premises before you are arrested for contempt of court. And regarding your belongings, I believe Mrs. Wilson mentioned they are on the curb. I suggest you hurry before it rains." The humiliation was absolute. The investors who had been clapping for him an hour ago were now looking at their phones, desperately trying to disassociate themselves from the man who was being evicted by a judge in the middle of his own party. But I wasn't done. I nodded to the officer on the left. "Excuse me, Judge," the officer said, stepping forward. "We also have a warrant here for Mr. Wilson regarding a separate matter." Marcus recoiled. "A warrant for what? I didn't do anything." The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as they unlocked was the loudest sound in the room. "Financial fraud," the officer stated. "We received a report from the issuer of the Platinum business card used to fund this event. It seems you signed a transaction for $20,000 on a corporate account that you are not authorized to use for personal entertainment. That is embezzlement, Mr. Wilson." Marcus's eyes bulged. He looked at me standing by the door. He looked at the receipt in his pocket. He realized then that the gift I had given him, the card I had handed him with a smile, was not a lifeline. It was a trap. I had reported the card stolen and used fraudulently the moment the transaction hit the pending status. "Nia," he screamed as the officer grabbed his wrists. "You set me up. Tell them. Tell them you gave me the card." I looked at him from across the room. I didn't say a word. I just raised my eyebrow. Who would believe him? The man caught on tape abusing his wife. The man caught on tape plotting paternity fraud. The man who had just been served a restraining order by a high court judge. His credibility was less than zero. "Stop resisting," The officer barked, spinning Marcus around and slamming him against the table. They cuffed him, hands behind his back. The same hands that had grabbed me on the subway were now restrained by the state of Georgia. The officer grabbed him by the arm and began to march him out. They didn't take him out the back way. They walked him right down the center aisle, past his fraternity brothers who turned their backs, past the church choir who shook their heads in shame, and past Tiffany's empty chair where his dreams of a better bloodline had died. He looked at me as he passed. His eyes were filled with tears. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice broken. "Don't let them take me. I am your husband." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a cow, the man who had kicked my hospital bag, the man who wanted to replace me. "You were my husband, Marcus," I said softly, my voice carrying just enough for him to hear. "Now you are just an inmate." Judge Robinson stopped next to me on her way out. She looked at the police car where they were shoving Marcus into the back seat next to his screaming mother. She turned to me and for the first time she smiled a genuine, warm smile. "You didn't just run, child," she said, placing a hand on my arm. "You flew." I watched the police car pull away, the sirens wailing into the night. It was a funeral procession for a marriage that should have ended years ago. I took a deep breath of the night air. It was crisp. It was clean. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine. I turned to the valet. "My car, please." He scrambled to get the keys, looking at me with a newfound respect. As I waited, I looked back at the steakhouse. The party was over. The guests were scattering like cockroaches when the lights come on. But I wasn't scattering. I was standing firm. I had lost a husband, but I had found myself. And looking at the empty space where the police car used to be, I knew it was the best trade I had ever made. There is a specific kind of silence that comes after a war is won. It is not the silence of fear, and it is not the silence of loneliness. It is the silence of peace. 6 months have passed since the night of the steakhouse massacre. 6 months since I watched the flashing lights of the police cars drag the toxicity out of my life. I am sitting on my sofa in the penthouse, the same sofa where Loretta used to put her feet up. But the scratchy Afghans are gone. The ceramic ducks are gone. My African art is back on the walls, and the morning sun is streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I am drinking tea from a cup that no one has criticized. I am wearing a robe that no one has stolen. I am breathing air that belongs entirely to me. The fallout was swift and brutal, just like I intended. When you drop a nuclear bomb, there is no rebuilding the ruins. Marcus tried to call me from the county jail 3 days after his arrest. He used his one phone call to beg. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He begged for bail money. He told me that the cell was cold and the food was inedible. I listened to his voice crackling over the line, the voice that used to command me to stand up on trains, and I felt absolutely nothing. I declined the charges and blocked the number. He eventually took a plea deal for the credit card fraud and embezzlement. He is currently serving 18 months in a state facility. When he gets out, he will have a felony record, no money, and no wife. He will be exactly what he was terrified of becoming, a nobody. Tiffany did not fare much better. David was a gentle man, but betrayal turned him into a shark in the courtroom. He sued her for paternity fraud, emotional distress, and the return of every single gift he had given her during their marriage. He won everything. Her parents, true to their word, cut her off completely to save their own reputation in the business community. The last I heard, Tiffany was working as a receptionist at a used car dealership in Decatur, living in a studio apartment that is smaller than my walk-in closet. She wanted a lifestyle she couldn't afford, funded by a man she didn't respect. Now she has neither. And then there is Loretta, the matriarch, the woman who thought she was the queen of the Wilson dynasty. Her ending was perhaps the most poetic of all. With Marcus in jail and her reputation in the church destroyed, she had nowhere to go. She tried to move in with her sister, but her sister slammed the door in her face, citing the video of the baby abuse. She had no savings because she had spent it all trying to look rich. She became a ward of the state. She is currently residing in a state-funded nursing home on the south side. It is understaffed and overcrowded. There are no lobster tails there. There is no one to fetch her water or listen to her preach. She is just another number in a system she used to look down on. I sent her a package once. It contained a single item, a framed photo of me and my son, happy and healthy. I wanted her to have something to look at while she sits in her plastic chair staring at a wall. I hear a cooing sound from the nursery. I stand up and walk into the room that is now a true sanctuary. My son is awake. He is standing up in his crib holding the bars, smiling at me with his two new teeth. I pick him up and kiss his chubby cheek. He smells like lavender and hope. I walked into the courthouse last week for the final time. The judge granted my petition without hesitation. His name is no longer Marcus Wilson Jr. That name is dead. It is buried under the weight of his father's sins. His name is Jordan. Just Jordan. Like the river. Strong, deep, and flowing toward a future that belongs only to him. I carry Jordan out to the balcony. The city of Atlanta stretches out before us, a glittering landscape of steel and glass. I can see the train tracks in the distance, the same tracks where this nightmare began. I think about that day often. I think about the moment I stood up. I think about the pain in my back and the shame burning my cheeks. They tried to break me. They tried to turn me into a servant in my own life. They thought that because I was a woman, because I was a wife, because I was a mother, that I would just take it. They thought my silence was submission. They didn't know that I was just waiting for the right moment to speak. I looked directly into the camera lens. I want every woman watching this to see my face. I want you to see that there are no bruises anymore. There are no bags under my eyes. They told me to give up my seat. I say my voice steady and strong. They told me that a good woman stands so others can sit. They told me to make myself small so they could feel big. Well, I gave them their seat. I gave them a front row seat to their own destruction. I gave them a seat at the table of consequences. And as for me, I shift Jordan to my hip and look out at the skyline that I own a piece of. I built my own chair, and I am sitting on the throne of my own making. I kiss Jordan's head and turn back toward the warmth of my home. The nightmare is over. The dream has just begun.